when they realise they don't have 22 problems, they actually have one great thing that's driving all of this stuff. And then when we can get a little bit closer to identifying why that is, all of the ripple effect is that all of these things start to improve all at the same time.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another exciting podcast. And today, I'm really excited to have our guest. And she's someone who's going to bring a ton of experience, compassion, and a truly personal perspective to the world of gut health. And today we have Julia Davies joining us. And I think we're going to try to focus on leaky gut, but that's a good starting off point. So Julia, what do you think when you think of leaky gut, I guess, what would be the way that you would describe it from, I guess, your time working with people?
Yeah, I guess it's the thing that everybody has to think about at some point if they've got an illness or any kind of chronic health condition or just tired all the time. You know, it's that sort of thing that is such like a foundational thing that if that's not right, it has such a profound effect systemically. So it's intestinal permeability is a gut issue, but it doesn't remain in the gut. It's how then a gut issue becomes the whole body. So I think that's like, it's relevance, I think. There's like not any condition where I wouldn't be considering what is their condition of their gut wall, is there any inflammation there? And it has just profound implications for mental health, for autoimmune conditions, for energy, for every kind of cellular function, really. It's every organ will be susceptible to things if the intestinal permeability is not there, that we just have to always consider it, really.
And do you think the growth of kind of our understanding of the fact that leaky gut exists, because for a really long time, I think traditional medicine didn't really appreciate the concept of leaky gut or this increased permeability, but we're definitely seeing a shift, not just in functional medicine, but I think more in traditional medicine, the idea that looking at the gut, when you have something that may traditionally seem not related to the gut at all, are you seeing a shift in kind of more general people's or practitioners' appreciation that the gut could be playing a role in something like you mentioned, like mental health, or like brain fog, or conditions that I don't think we used to define as having gut as a symptom?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's huge awareness. And in actual fact, I'd say like this is something that people self-diagnose a lot, way too much, actually. It's like they'll come, with the initial inquiry call before they join us for ongoing care. They'll say, I've got leaky gut. I was like, okay, tell me about that. How do you know you have leaky gut? Like what? And it's almost too commonplace now that it's becoming, what was candida in the 90s, that was the big self-diagnosis. Now it's leaky gut. So I think there's almost a bit in which, yes, I think that a lot of people are aware of it, but I think sometimes that gives it the wrong impression where people, particularly in like orthodox medicine, might be like, okay, that's just like an Instagram condition, so it's not real, it's not that. And so sort of the orthodox medicine perspective, I wouldn't say is really there considering leaky gut at all, or in fact any of the broader connections within the systems and organs of the body. But there is certainly a big awareness of making those connections as well. And I think the more that it is linked, mechanistically, understanding the process is quite well known now, isn't it? How, when your gut contents are meant to be in the gut and they're fine in the gut, in the tube, but if they actually come out of that and pass into the bloodstream, it sets off this array of inflammatory responses. So that is, underlying, we know that inflammation underlies most, if not all, chronic conditions. And we know that intestinal permeability causes inflammation, which then underlies those conditions. So you could just draw yourself a web of connection and really plausibly connect pretty much any condition to come back down to intestinal permeability. So it's not always the case, for some people. We actually use tests for it when we can and when the finances are available to do that. So we can actually see with clarity what type of leaky gut do you have. Like, is it the cells themselves that are damaged, or is it the tight junctions between the cells? And that can be helpful. Is that LPS as well? I mean, that's really the crucial bit, because LPS is lipopolysaccharide. So that's like the outside surface of the sum of the types of bacteria, particularly gram-negatives in the gut. And if you've got overgrowth of those and you're producing a lot of LPS in the gut, it's not a problem. But if it passes through into the bloodstream, it triggers such an inflammatory cascade, and the liver takes a real hit from having to process that as well. So if you've got a good, tight intestinal membrane where it's not allowing those bacterial products to actually pass through, you don't get that systemic impact at all. So I kind of see it when I'm measuring it in clinic is looking at the actual permeability, and then looking at the levels of LPS producers in the gut, and even if they've got LPS antibodies in the blood, because that will be really helpful to see, are we getting that translocation there?
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things, like in a research setting, like we use LPS to cause inflammatory conditions to push them forward, to research them, right? So if you're to induce a condition, if you're using LPS in a mouse or a rat model, clearly you don't want it floating around. We already know it's not good to be out there. And I think people don't appreciate that the gut is doing a lot of heavy lifting across the spectrum and plays a big role in things like the immune system and, taking everything you eat apart to be able to make the building blocks to do what your body needs to do next. But that only works when the gut stays inside where it's supposed to be. When things start coming out under processed or incorrectly or not fully taken apart, it causes your body to react to it because it's not supposed to be there. That's one thing our bodies do somewhat well, pretty consistently, is know when things aren't supposed to be where they are, there is a reaction to it. One of the issues I think around leaky gut is that sometimes by the time we realize that something's wrong, our systems realize something's wrong, it doesn't look like it's the gut is the issue anymore, or it's become chronic. And so now you've kind of like dominoes. By the time we're looking to try to fix it, multiple dominoes have fell down, or a whole cascade of things have happened. And so you kind of have to walk it back. And I think one of the things I've found confusing kind of understanding this topic more is there's still so much skepticism around it existing, or does it exist, or is it actually as important as we think it is? And how many conditions is it tied into? And I think you hit on the fact that maybe it's become very mainstream. And so maybe too many people are talking about it. And then kind of in the mainstream medicine cycle, I think people are thinking maybe people are talking about it too much, and maybe that's not really what it is. What do you think in terms of how it's, I guess, still debated as if it's an important thing to focus on, I guess, when you're trying to come back and understand a chronic condition?
I think, there's a couple of things kind of that spring to mind there. Usually by the time people come to my practice, they are quite broken in terms of the underlying mechanisms. So as you kind of illustrate there, we're looking at a plethora of different impacts, and then what role and how much, say we were to kind of put a percentage on how much the leaky gut aspect has contributed to that, it might have been the beginning sole trigger of everything in the inflammation. But by the time I'm seeing them, they've had all the downstream impacts of that inflammation, and then that's what we're trying to fix. And with that comes then multiple triggers, multiple sort of things that are driving the condition. But one thing that came up for me when you were talking about the inflammation is a really common mistake, and I think it is a really big mistake, is that people blame the inflammation, because inflammation is underlying all of these different conditions, and it can exhaust you and it can cause pain, and but actually the immune system is doing exactly what it is meant to do. it's exactly what it's meant to do. So if you get damaged cells in the intestinal lining, the immune system will start making antibodies against them because it recognizes their structure as different or damaged or, joined with something else. It's like not what it's meant to be. So it suddenly makes itself known to the immune system and you get inflammation. The immune system is right on it. That's what it's meant to do. So the notion of just everything reducing inflammation, we see it so much in like the natural health world with green pharmacy. That person must need loads of fish oil because they're inflamed. It's like, but actually, if you take away the inflammation, that's the bit that's trying to heal and repair everything. So it's not to say we don't want anti-inflammatories. It's just to say that that's, you're kind of going after the wrong guy. It's what's causing that and what's driving that I feel is really the bit that needs to be more well understood. Because if you reduce the inflammation but don't repair the damage and don't remove the triggers, what happens?
Yeah, and I think we've gotten away from understanding what the body's naturally supposed to do, and we have trouble getting through all the layers to kind of really understand what the root cause is. And I feel like we're getting closer. I think people's understanding and appreciation of functional and integrative medicine, the idea that we all have to look at the parts. I mean, I come from a neuroscience background, and I mean, going all through my training, we thought of the brain as a completely separate unit. Even further than that, people studied different parts of the brain and didn't think about the fact that those two parts communicate, but it's one organ. So for a very long time, I think medicine and science was very separatist. Heart people didn't talk to the gut people or the lung people but blood is everywhere. I think we sometimes forget there's a whole system that's pumping stuff all the way around, but everything is connected. But I think for a very long time, we studied everything in isolation. And I think that's hurt our understanding, because I think a lot of times people think this is a heart issue or this is a brain issue or but really we're all one system, and every system is very twined together. And so if you see a white flag, so like inflammation is kind of like your body being like, hey, over here, something's happening. And you don't think about, okay, well, that's then connected to something else. And even just simply inflammation and the immune system go together. And I think sometimes we even separate those two things. But where is that and why often gets separated? And now I spend a lot of time in gut health, so I'm maybe terribly biased. But the idea is that the gut is, if at nothing else, processes what you eat. And that's what your body uses to do everything. To think that we never thought that the gut could impact anything else seems silly now as we understand more about it. And now we're learning, some neurotransmitters are almost solely produced in the gut. And we're learning that the gut and the liver are almost directly connected. And we're learning that the immune system is really tied into the gut. And so I think we have to kind of understand that not just that the gut is, as important as it is, because again, biased, but that all the systems are working together. So you can't look at one without thinking of everything as a whole. And I think as someone who, I think if you're in these spaces, at some point you were a sick kid or you've been sick, because you don't scream from the mountaintops and really fight these fights unless you've been in them being like, somebody, please. And I think seeing now that we're appreciating that everything goes together, at least gives me hope that I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think we have to unlearn a lot of things. And I think we need to restudy a lot of things to really understand them. And I think that can come down to, ensuring that we're studying males and females equally, so we understand what the differences are, that we can understand that the immune system does impact the brain. And for a long time, we thought that the brain had its own immune system and didn't talk to anybody else, or that all these systems tie together. And I think when we think in terms of leaky gut, I think knowing that the gut system isn't working, well, what else does that impact? And then on the other side, when you have a chronic condition, walking it back to go, well, what other systems, other than the one that is screaming the loudest right now, has been impacted, or over time has kind of those symptoms have been covered up by the next one? Because as people, we're really good at learning to live with something. So when you're talking with someone, and maybe, I guess for you, like when you're meeting with patients to talk with them, do you find that people can talk really well about the symptoms they currently have, but it takes time to understand the ones that they've been living with, which sometimes can be really indicative of what what condition or what systems are really being impacted, because they've just learned to live with them a little bit.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like assumed. So, yeah, I mean, I had an initial consultation this week, and she was actually really struggling to tell. I was like, what is your day like? Like, I need to kind of like have a day in the life of you so that I can get my instincts going about what, how we move forward. And this person was in chronic pain, but didn't mention anything at all about fatigue or feeling tired or brain fog or anything like that. And so after I said, right, let's kind of get like a symptom list, we really stripped it down. And so she listed all of the symptoms that she was experiencing. And then I asked her at the end, what about your energy? And she was like, oh, I'm exhausted. Okay, right, let's put that on the list. But she hadn't thought to say that because she's just presumed that that goes with chronic pain, which it obviously does. But she was like, but that's part of living with the illness. So the symptom is part of the illness. And she didn't even connect that it really was kind of a symptom in its own right. And so, it was an interesting one. I mean, that's what the coaching aspect of what we do is about, is actually drawing the information that we need out of people. Because I think, mostly I see people with chronic pain conditions or quite complex illness, mold illness, fatigue conditions and autoimmunity. So all of those things are big, big conditions, and they are not, oh, I've got 3 symptoms, let's rate it out of 10 and see how we go. It's just not that simplistic. I'd love a day like that. But it's looking at the global picture of what happens to them. And if it's hard for them to even write down, how is that to live? But, when you said earlier about connecting the dots between all the organs and all the systems and all the parts, all you've got to do is like listen to a chronic illness patient, and they are doing it. So it baffles me why people think this is a new thing, that the body all works together. Because, when I really go through it with people, I'm kind of relaying it back to them. Okay, so, you've got energy problems. So that's in your cells and your mitochondria. You've got some bloating. So that's in your gut. You're not thinking clearly and you're really struggling to make decisions. So that's in your brain. You've got floaters in your eyes. And then what's happening with the reflux here? And is that some psoriasis on your skin? It's like, oh, look, we've just named every organ and system in the body that is impacted by this condition. So when you actually look at the chronic illness patient and they just describe what it's like, it is multi-system, isn't it? So it's sort of quite baffling, really, that it's not generally accepted that all of these things might be connected, or this just poor unfortunate man has developed 22 conditions. Like, how bad is that? So of course it's all connected. But I think that's, one of the things that I see in the turnaround in the first time I speak to people is often when they realize they don't have 22 problems, they actually have one great thing that's driving all of this stuff. And then when we can get a little bit closer to identifying why that is, all of the ripple effect is that all of these things start to improve all at the same time. And that's the magic, isn't it? It's the complexity, is that all your body systems do get impacted by chronic illness. But then the magic is when you start nailing what is driving it, then all of those things all improve. So you're not just treating like one thing for this condition, one thing for that condition, which is really how kind of modern medicine has gone to, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think even sometimes when you bring it back to the beginning, like we all start as a small group of cells and they just keep dividing. So it's all the same. And it makes sense that they're connected. And I feel like we're living in the medicine version of hindsight is 2020, where you're like, oh, that totally makes sense. But for a very long time, we just couldn't see it, I think. And so it's a fun time to be in it, because I feel like there's a lot more, we're moving in a faster kind of better direction, especially with people with chronic disease. Because I know in a lot of cases that you kind of lose hope, or you're not really sure what's next. And I think we're living in a time where we're pushing those boundaries and trying to really figure it out. And I think patients are learning more to self-advocate, but I think there's a lot more options in terms of people that are willing to hear the whole story and look at it from a whole body perspective. And I think you're right when you say, once you figure out what it is and you start peeling back those issues, they all start to kind of improve together, because the body is healing as a whole unit. So from your experience, I guess, what are some of the most common signs or symptoms that people kind of come in with that would be, I guess, for you, good red herring, I guess, of that maybe the gut is playing a role, or maybe leaky gut is in there or is part of the story? What's something you hear kind of that for you kind of goes, okay, so this is something we should focus on?
Probably brain fog and grogginess. That's quite hard to say all in one, isn't it? Brain fog and grogginess, but that kind of feeling like you're not really connected, that is quite a common thing. Any sort of fatigue. So often it doesn't express in the gut as a symptom. That's the thing. So, you do tend to get dysbiotic microbiome, but that can sometimes just send all the wrong messages into your body systems rather than cause constipation or diarrhea, for example. So I actually sometimes say to people, you're quite lucky that you've got gut symptoms because it's flagging up there's something not quite right before it gets to the rest of your body. But sometimes people don't get those sorts of gut symptoms. They just get it manifest as joint inflammation or something like that. The other aspect of what I see a fair bit is I see people with mold illness, so that can trigger CIRS, which stands for chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And these people, it's really identified what happens in these people where they have struggled to process biotoxins is it actually raises the level of MMP9, matrix metalloproteinase 9, and that can actually really destroy the gut lining. And another impact of that same pathway is low levels of alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, or MSH. So you've got two very key mechanisms that have been identified that get triggered by mold illness, actually pretty much destroy the gut lining. So you're inhaling mold from your water damaged building or your environment or your moldy car or office, but it has such a direct impact on the gut. So I often see with people that have like the fatigue from CIRS and mold exposure, or chronic fatigue or long COVID, in them, I'm always thinking leaky gut, always, because the mechanistic way is like, well, you've got probably low MSH, probably high MMP9. These are things that are really, really, really depleting that gut lining and making it much more likely to get a permeability issue. So in that kind of cohort, I would definitely be looking at it pretty much every time and almost presuming that it's going to need as much support as we can give it, because the testing is really good. I use Cyrex Labs for testing in the permeability test there, because I find really helpful, really scientific, and I really like using that when I can. But if people haven't got the finances to put towards it, but you can still support the gut function and still use the nutrition that will help support the healthiest intestinal lining without knowing for sure that they've got that. But again, when you nail it and your patient gets better and they're making strides and improvements, you know that you're on the right track. But I think it's very hard to name exactly what a symptom picture looks like for an intestinal permeability issue, but I'd just say it's always on the table, always, for every chronic illness patient.
And I think the gut health, I think when we think about the things we know that make gut health better, exercise, good, broad, diverse diet, sleep, low stress. If you've ever been alive, really, you want to eat healthy. And how many times you've been told since you were a child till your adulthood, you really need to focus on your diet, make sure you're eating. And now that varies in some. We've kind of, I think, got to a point in society that we're trying to always what's the best one? What do we take out? What do we put in? And I think from a gut perspective, it's just diversity, but we know diet is important for health. We know exercise is important for health, low stress, good sleep, all these things we know are systematically important, but they are some of the biggest factors in gut health. But I think highlights the picture of, the things that are good for your whole body will also be good for your gut. And the things that are bad for your body are also bad for your gut. So one of the things we know that's very destructive for the gut microbiomes, environmental toxins. And so when you're talking about mold, it is one of the things that can be really destructive. But I think we are only now really appreciating how much the environment impacts our really impacts our health. I think we're really starting now to see that being constantly exposed to mold or heavy metals and things can have, systematic issues across your health. And so I think we're now looking at the environmental toxins more importantly, to how it may not initially look like a mold issue, but when you start really kind of teasing everything apart, you see that it is playing a role. And it's, I think all of this is very chicken of the egg. Like, what is the first thing that started that led to all of this can be kind of hard to hit the nail on the head with. But I think we're now seeing, or at a heightened level, understanding how the importance of the environment and understanding the importance of the things we put into our body or that our body are exposed to, how that can impact all of the systems. Because again, we are one unit. But I think we're changing the picture in that way. And I don't know from your perspective, because you do a lot of environmental kind of impacts on health, but do you see that? Do you think more people are appreciating that now? Or do you see that there's like a wider appreciation, or more people are looking at that as an important factor in kind of chronic conditions?
I wish they were, but I actually think we've got quite a long way to go with that in terms of awareness, because I think there's this kind of thing that kind of drives me really mad. It's like, if it was that harmful, it wouldn't be on the shelf. If it was that bad for you, we wouldn't be able to buy it. It's like, but who's the big they that decides all this stuff? There isn't. There is, like, it is basically down to our own jurisdiction, really. And I think what is really crucial, and what I often describe to people, is looking at like the border forces of your body and the barriers. So everyone knows about leaky gut now. Like I said, it's like, that's the really popular one. But what about leaky lungs? And what happens if you've got mucosa production in your nasal cavity chronically, or you've got catarrh every morning when you wake up? Like, this is like your barrier having a fit. It's like, why is it throwing off all this mucus? What is it trying to get rid of? What is it trying to do? And with your lung barrier, I think it's a bit more known that your blood-brain barrier has got similarities to your gut barrier. So if you've got intestinal lining issues, then that can, potentially lead to kind of brain and cognitive issues as well. I think that's becoming a little bit more well known. But I think whenever I talk about the lungs, people are like, okay, repeat that, because, but it's just another barrier. It's another part of the border force. And so everything that you're inhaling, whether it be mold or whether it be a awful scented candle, or your fragrance washing powders, or your perfume, or your fragrance, everything is fragranced, isn't it? And it's, unless you're actively allergic or sensitive to those things, you just would walk around anybody's house. I walk around people's houses and remove their plug-in air fresheners. The fact that you would buy something with 2,000 chemicals in and plug it in and switch it on and think that's okay for your kids and your pets and yourself, but we're getting an annihilation on our lungs, and that mucosal lining in our lungs is trying to deal best it can with all these chemicals and all these things that we just don't we don't know the impact of these things. And before it's even got time to process it, it's another thing and another thing and another thing everywhere you go. So I think, most people know mold is not good for you. And there's been some shows here in the UK about mold exposure that at least it's kind of beginning to come into people's awareness, but people's actual choice of personal care and cleaning products and just how they live their life is so heavily fragranced that I'm just picking on fragrances, but I think that's the particular thing. And with labeling regulations, you don't really know what you're getting. And so I think that's just a really, really sneaky one. But it's the general chemical exposure that I feel needs more education on, just to get people to know that, how can you heal your gut problem by throwing your perfume away? Okay, so let's just really explore that connection. So yeah, it's something I feel really strongly about, because if you've got one of your borders down, what's going to happen to the other borders? They're going to go hypervigilant. You don't even need to be a scientist to understand that. You'll get hypervigilant borders, and then that'll start reacting against something else and being super paranoid. Then that also will begin to lose its integrity. So I think it's really important what you're breathing in order to take care of your gut, as well as what you're eating and drinking.
Yeah. And I think I never really thought of about it like that. The idea that like anything you're putting in, you really need to be fully aware of. And I have a ton of allergies. I am a walking allergy. And so my house is completely scent free. People walk in, they're like, it's kind of weird. And I'm like, I live just complete, and it's one less thing. And I think it's a choice because I know I'm reactive to it. But I have this thing. It's like, I don't like going with anything that I don't fully know what it is. But I think there's this implicit trust that if it's being sold, it must be safe. And on the science side of things, I think there's a lot of time we study things in a lab-based environment, but it takes a really long time from that to transfer to the general public. And I think we're seeing a change in that, at least from my perspective, because we're teaching scientists how to communicate with people. How do we get our science out on TikTok and Instagram and these places? How do we communicate it more generally? And teaching science communication to scientists sounds like something we probably should have been doing for a very long time, but we weren't. and scientists, not all of us want to talk to everybody about everything. So learning that, but I think it's because there's stuff we're learning or that we've known for probably longer than people realize, that we know things are bad. Even diets, we know like how quickly when you shift to a Western style diet, how much and how quickly your body shifts. And then the negative traits we associate with that type of diet, how quickly people can pick them up. I think it's within 6 months of people moving from a non-Westernized society to Westernized and switching diets, they start seeing very similar patterns to someone who's been eating that diet for a very long time. And we know these diets aren't great for you. But I don't think that's publicly known how quickly your diet can change, because the other side is true as well. If you start really paying attention to what's going in your body or what's around your body's ability to bounce back when those things are removed is quite remarkable. And sometimes it needs more help because it's been more chronic and you don't have, all the parts your body needs to bounce back, but it's there and it wants to. So we like being aware of everything. And I think I don't even appreciate like those plug-in wall things. It's just literally liquid chemical that we heat. And if you've ever taken any type of chemistry class, even in like high school, like when you heat something, it changes. And so I never really thought about it, but now that I'm like, yeah, that's kind of insane that we, not only is it there in liquid form, then we heat it, which makes it worse and it changes it. And so I think we need to be more aware of what's around us and what all of that does kind of in a cascade of like, what does it look like and what other things happen? So like we're just recently now starting to, on the science side of things, connect the gut and the lungs. There's a thing, and we've known that asthma may play, it's, allergy-based asthmas and how that might have a gut connection. But now we're seeing almost a more direct connection, like the gut-brain connection. So it's another system that's connected, but thinking about, the lungs getting, the junctions there getting too loose and things kind of not being where they're supposed to be, how that could cascade into another system that has the same kind of tight junctions. Loosening is, it's another domino that I'm currently like having an aha moment. So it's a really good way to look at it. And I think it's important for people to kind of, when you're really looking at what's causing a health issue, to look all around you. I think that's a really cool take. I'm just having a moment. My brain's like, oh yeah, we're having
one of the things that I do sometimes include, there's like, sort of observations that you make when you're seeing people with kind of similar profiles of symptoms. And one of the things that I would say is like an absolute key star supplement is sodium butyrate. And obviously that's a short chain fat that the gut microbiome should be making. And that really helps support a really healthy intestinal lining. But that is the thing that I would say in like 2-3 weeks of taking it, I probably get the most positive feedback with that is insane. It's like had a really anti-inflammatory effect. It's made their brain fog go away. It's, whatever it might be. And I think, okay, that's a big clue there that there's a permeability issue and your body is it's not making enough of that, or it's helping to just quickly fuel and repair some damage that's going on. So that's like a key. So these little tricks can be helpful for people that haven't got money for doing functional testing and they're just saved up to kind of go through the process of having a consultation. And it's like, okay, well, let's try this and see. And if within a week you feel different, we know that we're on the right track. And that is the thing. I mean, butyrate is, I think I review this every now and again, think if there's one thing that were to be taken off the shelf supplement wise and it would like ruin your practice, what would it be? And I reckon sodium butyrate is up there with really valuable in helping support people. But the fact it works so well is really concerning. It's like, what is the state of people's guts generally? Like, is this it? Is this just modern living now? Because, you referred to the pandemic, people were sterilising, my kids' school is still sanitising hands before the kids are allowed in the building. And, there's the impact of that on the microbiome as well as the impact of COVID itself on the microbiome. But it's an interesting time, isn't it, to be in this field, because there's a lot of change there, isn't there? Lack of diversity, loss of certain strains and certain types of bacteria, and then the impacts that that's caused, and then the onset of brand new autoimmunity on the timeline that is triggered by COVID. But that over sanitization, I think, is a real issue. It kind of goes with the chemical aspect of things, and the way that modern life is lived these days is quite antimicrobial, I would say. Yeah.
I think we just don't appreciate even that our skin has a biome. Our mouth has its own. They're all interconnected. And I think we spent so long, we had just gotten to the point before COVID where like there wasn't as much hand sanitizer around. It wasn't easy to get. You didn't see it everywhere, to the point where like it was hard to make enough because we had gone and got rid of it. And there was a reason for that, right? Like now we're moving back. I think it'll be a while before we get out of the cycle. But it's even just how much people interacted, because when you interact with people, and a lot of people have noted this, like after we got back to the new normal, people were like, but then everybody got sick. And it was like, no, because everybody wasn't mixing germs all the time. That's what we're doing on a regular basis.
That's basically what we're doing is sharing germs.
It helps. Yeah. You don't react to everything when you're exposed to it on a regular basis. And when you get so sterile or so removed, then you react to everything. And I think will be something we try to learn more about in terms of our immune systems, because why does that happen as quickly? And COVID was over years, but it can happen over short periods of time. If you ever keep your kid home for daycare for 3 days instead of 2, and then they go back the next day, you're kind of rolling the dice on if they're going to get sick or not. And so what does that mean in terms of what our immune system is and how strong it is? And is that because, we've shifted away from maybe having as diverse biomes kind of everywhere, which impact each other? And is that impacting the immune system? Because we know the immune system is regulated. A good portion of it, at least, was created and is tied to the gut microbiome. So if our immune system becomes reactive quickly, is there something underlying generally across the board? Was our immune systems always like that? And I know there's this historical side of like, how have things shifted over time? And we look at things like the gut microbiome. We've been modulating the gut microbiome through medicine since like 4th century China without even knowing that's what they were doing. So like, it's always, I think, kind of been known as something that could play a role. But how have we shifted, I guess, as a society from COVID or pre that to why are we seeing more and new immune-based conditions? Why are we seeing all these new things coming up, or are them happening in younger populations than they used to? Even in things like what we used to consider more aging-based disorders like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, all of these things, we're now seeing more. I think, I don't know if 20, 30 years ago, how often you would read about, and at least on the science side of things, early onset early onset. We're seeing more of this. And so what's shifting? Are we aging differently? Are different systems not the same as they used to be? So I think there's a lot of like historical kind of understanding what's shifted. And when we have something so epic as, the pandemic, which we used to study like stress response of societal changes over a week when there was a huge blackout. We would use that as a time point to understand stressors in terms of pregnancies or mental health, those things. When you look at something that lasts years, it'll be a very long time, I think, before we fully understand what the implications of that
so
are.
much we don't know, isn't there? So much. But, I think I think food habits has got a lot to answer for, really, because we're not eating the things that really nourish us and nourish our mucosal membranes, like, the vitamin A, zinc foods. Like, we're not really eating those things. It's all been replaced by a lot of processed food, really high sugar foods. And I think that's got a lot to answer for in almost like starting on the back foot. So when the pandemic hit, people with diabetes or poorly regulated sugar, they were much more susceptible to getting really severe forms of COVID. So I think diet is, I don't feel that there's ever one thing that you can really name as the thing. Because it's just, there's so much that's changed about our culture, about our sense of community, about what we're eating, about our stress levels and our responsibilities and our chemicals and everything. I think it just comes into a perfect storm, really. But I do think that what strikes me as really odd is when you do eat quite a natural diet, just like meat, eggs, fish, veg, people think, oh, that's interesting. Why are you doing that? Like, why is that interesting? Isn't that actually just food? But actually, it's much more expensive to eat that way than it is to get, 5 micro meals and just, ping it into the microwave. I think our food habits, our fast food culture, our convenience culture, all of that, like, it literally does destroy your gut because it's not offering diversity. It's not offering the nutrition that we really need to actually do our own repair jobs. So I think there's so many factors, isn't there? But there's a lot, I think, culturally we can do far better. But I think there's a lot that's broken in terms of things like sugar addictions and, people are not going to throw away all their chemicals in their life unless they've got a real need to. So if they've got an autoimmune condition and they then understand why, then they'll change. But where's the motivation if they don't have an autoimmune condition? So I think all these things, it's like the way that we live is actually not conducive to healthy gut health and certainly not to a healthy gut lining. But, stress has a huge impact, doesn't it? In terms of even the blood supply to the gut, like it just diverts it all away. And even if you've got the best diet in the world, if you've got dysregulated cortisol levels, then that is going to become a real problem for your gut as well. So it is managing the perfect storm, I think. It's just living, as you say, just being alive is managing this perfect storm of things. But I think the more education, the better, because if you can understand what you're trying to do, then it's so much easier to do it. But I think a lot of people don't understand these different connections. And that's really, that's something that I think we can really build on over the next few years.
And then I guess if you were trying to understand or try to understand how to start the process of gut healing, what would be the first step that someone could go through in terms of evaluating their nutrition or evaluating their lifestyle to look for things that might be having bigger impacts on their gut health in terms of what's around them or what they're consuming?
Yeah, so I kind of look at it from two perspectives. So I do kind of what I would categorize as like a general cleanup. So get the sugar and the processed foods away, get rid of the Diet Coke and the alcohol for a bit, and just purify the intake of foods, because that will just help clean up that side of things. Then I do the same with the environment because of that impact we talked about on the lungs, and just clean up that side of things. So everything then they're eating and drinking and breathing is a lot more purer and a lot more conducive to rebuilding something. But the other aspect I look at, which takes dominance in most people I see, is the nervous system. If you haven't got a nervous system that remembers how to be calm, it's really difficult to proceed with the healing process. And so whether that's completely causative or whether it's just part of something else that's contributing, it really needs to be addressed. So I've found that we hit a brick wall if someone's not prepared to go there in terms of the nervous system aspect. So in our practice, we do a lot of circadian rhythm work and try and get people outdoors, and particularly first thing in the morning, we're trying to encourage people how to be more responsible with screens, particularly after sunset. So when your eyes are not meant to be seeing artificial, I mean, they're never meant to see artificial light, let's face it, but we have to kind of work, we're on screens right now, it's part of living, and it's not necessarily dreadful for you, but at the right time it's okay. But after dark, come in, put all your lights on, watch TV, all of this kind of stuff is not good for our nervous system and our circadian rhythm. So we try and educate people with absolute basics like that, and grounding, hydration, getting good quality tissue fluid, because if you can help the fascia in the body, that literally feeds every single nook and cranny of your body. So if you can get fascia hydrated and a little bit of physical movement in there, some good breath work, these basic things that cost absolutely nothing at all can actually start from the inside out, optimizing your body and your structure. So we do a lot of things like that, and it's wrapped into calming the nervous system. So some people need more support than others in that sense, but we usually have to go through that process in virtually everybody just to get them to a point where their body remembers it's okay to start the healing process, rather than stuck in fight or flight, managing a chronic condition, in a lot of pain, or haven't got any energy to do anything. That's not a state of the nervous system that we can actually practically work with. So we need to use techniques that tell the body it's safe again, and then we can proceed.
Yeah. And I think we kind of hit on this. That may not be the main symptom of the chronic condition, or it may be not where the chronic condition started, but as the longer you have it, the more systems that are impacted. And from a research standpoint, the number of times I read like either shifted sleep schedules or improper sleep schedules, the impact of that. And really it comes down to being awake when it is daytime, being asleep when it is nighttime, how much impact that has on re-regulating sleep. But then when sleep is functioning properly and the hormones related to sleep are working when they're supposed to, the kind of domino effect again of that, and everything that can get dysregulated, and not that the sleep was the cause of it, but it's part of the problem. And sometimes, when you're really stressed, your sleep gets impacted. Well, it's not the sleep that's causing the stress, but those two things are tied together. But then it's what caused the stress, and keep going backwards. But understanding that once you sleep correctly, if that's, if you can get yourself being awake and out and exposed to daylight and then sleeping when it is night, that will help, because your body does so much when it's sleeping. It's kind of like the moment for your body to kind of figure out what it needs to do next. And from a brain perspective, kind of repairing and doing. But if you can't sleep or you're not sleeping at the right times, your body isn't actually set up to sleep correctly. And so, that often isn't it wasn't the start of anything, but it's definitely something that, you have to kind of start there and work backwards, because if you fix everything, but someone's still sleeping terribly, you're not going to get the same returns on that. So I think it goes back to this idea that like you really do, it's a whole person, and it's all of the things that go into living and being, eating, what you're exposed to, how much you sleep, how stressed you are, how much you're moving, all of those things play a role in kind of the presentation of a disease, but also how we roll back that disease is all of those pieces. So I think it's important for people to understand, but it's also important to have that as part of the conversation when you're trying to understand what's actually happening. And if someone's listening and they think that at least their gut's playing a role, what would be the first step that you think they should take? Is it so that they can understand, I think it might be my gut. So when they want to go talk to their health practitioner, or they want to go to the next step, that they can say like, I do think it's my gut, and I did X, I slept better, I ate something, or they did something that they could say like, I do see an improvement. And so maybe this is, can help them kind of advocate for this being, maybe a part of how they're feeling?
I mean, any kind of functional medicine practitioner will be thinking about all of the body systems at once anyway. So I think it's if they're going into kind of more of a mainstream medical environment that it can be harder to get your message across in that sense. And I think really what we're looking at is what can we learn from what you've done so far. So quite often when people come to us, they've seen a number of people before and different professionals, and it's like, okay, so what have you're not where you need to be, but what have you learned about yourself? And that can be really powerful. So I think tracking whatever you do, whether it's on your own or with a practitioner or in mainstream medicine, but actually you yourself tracking is one of the most important things you can do, because you can write your own timeline of events, of things that have happened, interventions that you've taken. And if something's made you worse, brilliant, we need to understand why. But that gives us information. It's like, that's flared you up, or that's done something bad. Okay, well, what can we learn from it? It's not just, right, go back to the beginning, square one. It's like, what can we learn from that? And if there is something that really helps. So like often people would say, if I take probiotics, I can go to the toilet. If I don't take probiotics, I'm really constipated. So I'm just going to take probiotics. And so what I would do is encourage them to take the next step with that. It's like, well, you shouldn't need a probiotic for the rest of your days. So how are we going to figure out why that is working? What deficiencies have you got in your microbiome? What processes are not happening naturally in your gut that require you to take an external source of bacteria to enable a normal function to go forward? And then sometimes they look at you like you're crazy. It's like, but the solution is in the pill. But actually it doesn't, if you actually follow that through, it doesn't work. 6 months later, it won't then have that effect. It just won't do it. So they will always run out. And then it kind of comes down to then getting that education across of how the gut works. If you're not chewing properly, or if you've got poor stomach acid, it's going to have a downstream impact all the way through. So it's like starting at the beginning and understanding. I do this in group sessions sometimes, is actually work people through, like, what would it look like if you've got an issue in your mouth or throat? What would it look like if you've got an issue with your stomach? What would it look like if you've got an issue with your small intestine or your gallbladder or your liver, or something like that? And get them to really connect with the whole machinery all the way from top to bottom, and then figure out which bit or all of the bits need attention to make sure that then they don't have that symptom or have anything that needs managing. So I always aim for the highest, which is a complete reversal back to normal physiology. That's always what I aim for, regardless of diagnosis, is we aim for normal physiology. Not how do we manage this condition? What natural things do you need from the health food store to manage this condition? That can be really helpful in the meantime, but you're always aiming for normal physiology that then runs itself.
Yeah. And I mean, from our perspective, with the kind of focus, we focus on FMT or fecal microbiota transplantation, but the idea is resetting the gut has a cascade of events. It doesn't always solve everything, but we know that fixing it. But that's kind of at the extreme. There's so many things before that. And I think understanding where the gut plays a role, but not just the gut, because there's so many symptoms. And I think when you're explaining, kind of walking people through, like, what does each part kind of look like in a symptom or a presentation, and kind of trying to fully understand that, I think it's an important part of education, because I think people don't really understand their body and what it does and how magical it is, but also how quickly it can get kind of off the rails. So I think that's an important kind of perspective to take. And you're based in the UK, but can people reach out to you if they're not in the UK to kind of try to understand or get your perspective? Or you've talked about having kind of initial consultations with people. Is that something that anyone can do, or do you have to be in the UK?
Yeah, no, I see people worldwide, so that's fine. I'm covered for US and Canada as well, and it can be done online. So I do have a physical practice where I work, but I do a lot of remote work, as we all do now. And I do groups as well, which I find really really important actually to offer groups, because it brings the price down a lot rather than like compared to the one-to-one work, but also it gives people that sense of it's a real support and identification with someone else that's suffering, because everyone feels isolated. That's a really common thing that I've observed over the years, is people always feel they're the only one that's struggling so much and so hard, particularly with fatigue conditions when they're quite limited in what they can do and even leave the house. To meet then 6 or 8 other people that are in exactly the same position, that actually heals in itself. And I think that's really special. So groups are something I'm really passionate about. And I do group work in sort of different things, some really large group work when we're trying to do circadian rhythm alignment, and then smaller group works when we need to like really get into the nitty gritty. But yeah, that's something that I feel is really important, to just bring back that community sense again, and that there are people that share your experience and understand it and really get it. That's really important.
Yeah. And I think it helps people be willing or be able to see that when they're not the only one, that there are more people. I think it gives you more power to think that, you know, there must be a solution if it's not just me. Sometimes I think when you think you're the only person suffering from this, you're like, maybe this is just what it is. But when you see that other people are in the same boat, I think somehow you feel like maybe there's a way out, because not everyone, you know, the more people that I think are facing it, I think you can see there's like, you know, not just support from the people, but support that you weren't completely alone is really important. And I think we're starting to appreciate that more, even just like the difference of when you exercise alone versus exercising in a group, or exercising with friends. You get more benefits when you don't do it alone. And so I think we're starting to understand that like being around people and doing things together has its own benefit. And I think seeing that from a healthcare perspective, I think is it's nice to see. And I think it has a lot of value, because I think it's going to allow people to heal differently, but as well feel less alone. And that in itself can allow people, I think, to respond better, because they're in a better mindset. And as you were talking about, kind of that fight or flight, or that kind of neurological aspect to chronic conditions is an important aspect to take into consideration. And I think just hearing you talk, I think people are going to want to talk to you as well, because I feel like you have a really great perspective on what chronic conditions look like, and kind of the whole body impact. So I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge today.
Thank you. No, it's been good chatting. Definitely.
Thank you so much. And I will put in the description of the video how people can contact you as well. And I really appreciate talking with you today. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.